Meet Charlie, our Majungasaurus hatchling, born into one of the last great predator lineages to ever walk the planet. The species lived in the late Cretaceous Madagascar roughly 70 to 66 million years ago, right on the edge of the extinction event that ended the age of non-avian dinosaurs. Right now, Charlie's all curiosity and momentum, still learning routines, testing new spaces, and investigating anything that moves. But this stage doesn't last. As an adult, Majungasaurus can reach about 23 feet long and weigh over 2,200 pounds, built around one clear priority: dominance through the head and jaws. Even at a glance, Charlie's species is unmistakable. Majungasaurus is defined by a white skull, a rough, thick, and heavily textured snout, and a single rounded horn on the roof of the head. That horn has a reputation all its own, because one of the earliest fossils was a dome-like skull bone that researchers originally mistook for the head dome of a pachycephalosaur. Only later, as more complete material came to light, did the story sharpen into focus. The dome was actually part of a horned carnivorous predator with the skull built to take and deliver punishing force. In most dinosaur ecosystems, there's an apex predator at the top of the food web. In late Cretaceous Madagascar, that role belonged to Majungasaurus crenatissimus, a cousin of Carnotaurus with its own signature head ornament and a skull architecture designed for impact. In some ways, Majungasaurus even converged on the same problem-solving design seen in Tyrannosaurs: deep jaws, a reinforced skull, and tiny forelimbs reduced to safely stay out of the way. Those arms were short and not very mobile, ending in 4 fingers without claws, not built to grab, but to avoid injury while the jaws did the real work. And Charlie's name is intentional. We chose Charlie as a tribute to Charles de Parrot, connected to the early scientific history of this dinosaur, because every animal we showcase here has 2 stories: the life it lived in its world, and the long, messy, very human process of figuring out what it actually was. Majungasaurus has been part of that process for more than a century. The first remains were discovered in 1896, initially misidentified as Megalosaurus, and the genus itself was formally named in 1955. Today, thanks to several well-preserved skulls and abundant skeletal material, Majungasaurus is one of the best studied theropods from the southern hemisphere, which means Charlie is just one small window into one of the last predator dynasties before the end. In this exclusive feature, we'll explore Majungasaurus' paleontological profile, uncover the science behind its discovery and behavior, trace its place within the Jurassic Park legacy, and finally review how our team has reimagined its world as a living exhibit for guests to experience. Whether you're a first-time visitor or a park manager looking for an inspiration to refine your own carnivore habitat, we hope this program gives you a closer look at what it takes to translate an ancient ecosystem into a modern exhibit design built for Charlie and the rest of his dinosaur family. Up next, we'll take a closer look at the animal itself, its size, anatomy, and defining characteristics in the description section. And by bringing Majungasaurus back, Jurassic World doesn't just resurrect another predator, it honors the history of science behind it and the enduring legacy of one of Madagascar's last great carnivores. If you're meeting Charlie for the first time, it's easy to forget what you're looking at. At this stage, he's quick, curious, and still learning the rules of his habitat. When the gates shift, where the shade falls, which scent means enrichment, and which sounds mean feeding protocols. But Charlie's not just any hatchling. He is Majungasaurus crenatissimus, an abelisaur theropod and the sole recognized species within the genus. Some older references may still use the name Majungatholus, but today it's treated as a junior synonym, essentially the same animal under a different historical label. Within the abelisaur family tree, Majungasaurus is often grouped with its close relative in a subfamily called Majungasaurinae. As Charlie grows, the family resemblance becomes unmistakable. Like other abelisaurids, Majungasaurus is a bipedal predator with a short snout, a powerful torso, and a body designed to put its weight behind the head and neck. The hind limbs are stocky and strong, and the long tail acts like a counterbalance, keeping the center of gravity over the hips during turns, lunges, and holds. And then there are the arms, the part every guest asks about. Majungasaurus' forelimbs are extremely reduced, and in our management program, we treat them the way nature intended, not as tools but as anatomy that stays safely out of the way. Jurassic World field assessments confirm their lower arms is robust but short, and the hand carries 4 metatarsals with 4 very reduced and inflexible digits with no claws. The finger bones lack the usual attachment features you would expect for claws and tendons, and some elements are fused, indicating the hand was essentially immobile. In other words, the arms are not there to grab, they are there not to break. Majungasaurus is famous for its skull and is exceptionally well known compared to most theropods. The overall shape matches the abelisaur blueprint, proportionally short for its height, but not as short as Carnotaurus, where Majungasaurus stands out its width. The skull is noticeably broader than most of its relatives, and like all abelisaurids, the outside surface carry a rough, sculptured texture that gives the animal a rugged, armored look even before you notice the ornamentation. Charlie's family also carries two defining features that have become the species' signature. First, the nasal bones are extreme, thick, fused, and reinforced, with a low central ridge towards the nostrils. Second, the frontal bones support a distinctive dome-like horn on top of the skull. These structures are covered in keratin, adding a visible cap to the horn and a tougher finish to the snout. CT scans also show hylosinus cavities inside part of the nasal structure and horn, likely helping reduce weight while maintaining strength. Even the teeth tell a story. Majungasaurus carries 17 teeth in each maxilla and each dentary, more than most abelisaurids, and the crowns are relatively short. That matters because short crowns are harder to snap during a struggle. Majungasaurus does not look like a classic long-snouted theropod predator, and its skull shape has led many scientists to propose a different feeding strategy than the repeated quick-bite approach often imagined for narrow-skulled hunters. In simplified terms, narrow skull handle vertical bite stress well, but they are not as optimized for resisting torsion, meaning twisting forces. Abelisaurids, especially Majungasaurus, with its short, broad, tall skull, may have leaned to a strategy closer to modern felids: bite once, lock in, hold on. Charlie's family is built to support that. The neck is reinforced by robust vertebrae and interlocking ribs, with ossified tendons and heavy muscle attachment sites, all pointing to a head and neck system designed to stay stable even when prey fights back. The front teeth of the upper jaw are most robust, likely serving as an anchor point during an initial hold, and tooth shape may have helped keep the bite planted rather than slicing cleanly. And if you're wondering how a predator keeps that equipment functional, there's another detail that surprises people. Tooth replacement in Majungasaurus appears to have been exceptionally rapid, with evidence suggesting it replaced teeth multiple times faster than many other theropods, cycling a full set in roughly 2 months. Gnawing on bone may have helped drive that wear and replacement pace. There is a reason our carnivore team treats Charlie's milestones as major operational events. Research on growth lines and bones suggests Majungasaurus may have been among the slowest growing theropods, taking around 20 years to reach maturity, possibly influenced by the harsh conditions of its environment, though slow growth is also seen in other abelisaurids. That means Charlie's baby phase is not just a cute chapter, it is the beginning of a long deliberate transformation, one that shifts exhibiting requirements, handling standards, and safety protocols over the years. Behaviorally, Majungasaurus is also documented in our program as showing exceptional aggression among medium-sized theropods, capable of triggering panic responses in similarly sized carnivores, with environmental stressors like thunderstorms potentially making those responses worse. Charlie may be small today, but the temperate profile is part of what we planned for early. In late Cretaceous Madagascar, Majungasaurus wasn't shaped by abundance. It was shaped by limitation, an island ecosystem where resources were seasonal, competition was constant, and predators that survived were the ones that would capitalize on opportunity. That flexibility begins early in our program with Charlie. As a hatchling, Charlie's diet is intentionally varied and scaled to both his body size and his development. At this stage, he receives a rotating menu of insects, small lizards, bird eggs, and small mammals. A diet designed to provide dense nutrition while encouraging natural investigation in foraging behaviors. As Charlie grows into a juvenile, the focus shifts. His feeding schedule becomes more structured, portions increase, and we begin introducing more complex enrichment and controlled prey stimulation to channel drive safely. Eventually, as he enters sub-adult management, his diet transitions to live prey as part of behavioral stimulation protocols designed to encourage species-typical hunting sequences and maintain physical engagement within the habitat. In those later phases, approved live feed offerings may include deer, steer, antelope, and goats, delivered under strict containment rules and observation standards established by a carnivore operations team. That progression isn't arbitrary. It mirrors what the fossil record suggested with Majungasaurus in the wild. On Lake Cretaceous Madagascar, one of the most well-known large animals in the ecosystem is Rapidosaurus, a titanosaur theropod that share the same environment. But the story doesn't end at apex predator hunts the biggest herbivore. Tooth marks on fossil bones indicate Majungasaurus also fed opportunistically, including scavenging and in some cases even cannibalism, a stark reminder that in a harsh, competitive ecosystem, even members of the same species could become a resource. For us, that's the real takeaway. Majungasaurus is a predator built not only to hunt, but to endure. an animal designed to make every feeding opportunity count. And when you watch Charlie now, small, alert, learning patterns, you're seeing the earliest version of that survival strategy take place. Now that we've met the animal as a living, breathing predator, Charlie in the present and Majungasaurus in its full adult form, it's time to rewind the clock and follow the evidence, from the first confusing fragments to the fossils that finally revealed what this dinosaur truly was, in the Paleontology section. Majungasaurus had not become famous because it was found once, perfectly preserved, and neatly labeled. It became famous because for more than a century, it refused to be understood. The first clue surfaced in 1896 along Madagascar's Boca River. A handful of bones and teeth were recovered, just enough to prove a large predator had lived there, but not enough to clearly define what it was. In the late 1800s, paleontology had a convenient solution for that problem. When a theropod didn't fit anywhere else, it often got filed under a familiar name. So French paleontologist Charles Perret did what many scientists of his era were forced to do. He placed the remains into a catch-all genus, Megalosaurus, and named the species Crenatissimus, the most notched, referring to the teeth's heavy serrations. For decades, that was the story. Fragmentary remains, borrowed name, and a predator hiding behind labels that never truly fit. Then in 1955, a jawbone arrived that changed the mood entirely. Paleontologist René Lavocat described the lower jaw from the Marovano Formation. Curved, powerful, and lined with teeth that matched those earlier finds. It was still incomplete, but it was more honest than the old assumptions. This was something that deserved its own name. Lavocat called it Majungasaurus, the Majunga lizard, and for the first time, Madagascar's mystery predator had an identity that actually belonged to it. Except the identity still wasn't stable, because in 1979, a strange fossil appeared, a dome-like piece of skull. And when you're holding a dope-shaped skull fragment, there's a very tempting conclusion. Paleontologist Suze Entaket interpreted it as a Pachycephalosaur-style head dome, and then named it Majungasaurus. For a while, this was treated as something extraordinary, possibly the first dome-headed dinosaur from the southern hemisphere. It was a great headline, but it was also wrong, and the only way to prove it was wrong was to find the rest of the animal. That moment came in the 1990s, when a long-term effort called the Mahajanga Basin Project began, a major collaboration between scientists from SUNY Stony Brook and the University of Tantanarivo, focused on late Cretaceous rocks near Baribotra. They weren't looking for a single trophy fossil, they were building a full ecosystem record, tooth by tooth, bone by bone. Almost immediately the desert started answering. Hundreds of theropod teeth turned up, all matching the same pattern. Then pieces of skull, then bones from multiple individuals. The region wasn't whispering anymore, it was speaking in bulk. And in 1996, the fossil record finally did what it almost never does. It delivered a near-complete skull. That skull wasn't just a specimen, it was a verdict, because sitting on the roof of that skull was the same dome-like structure that had once been labeled a Pachycephalosaur feature. Only now it wasn't on a herbivore, it was on the head of a carnivore. A heavy skull, thick-faced abelisaur predator with a blunt profile and reinforced cranial architecture. In other words, the dome wasn't a dome at all. It was part of a horned theropod skull, and the name, Majungasaurus, was based on a case of mistaken identity. By 1998, the dome-headed dinosaur quietly disappeared from the story, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more real, Majungasaurus. But science still had one last fight to settle. The name Majungasaurus was older, but could the original jaw actually be linked to the newly discovered skulls? For a time, there was hesitation. A single jaw can be shaky foundations for a whole genus, unless you can prove it carries features unique enough to stand on its own. So the project kept digging. More skulls arrived, more partial skeletons, individuals of different ages. Enough material to compare variation, growth, and anatomy across the population. Over time, the evidence stacked up so heavily that the naming debate stopped being philosophical and started being obvious. In 2007, the story locked into place with a major scientific monograph, a dedicated set of studies that tackled Majungasaurus from multiple angles and formally confirmed what the fossils had been saying for years. The correct name was Majungasaurus, and the animal behind that name was no longer a mystery. By then, the fossils had started revealing something else too, something less about classification and more about behavior. Some Majungasaurus bone carry bite marks that match Majungasaurus teeth, in spacing, in size, and in serration pattern. And because Majungasaurus is the only large theropod known from those same sites, the conclusion lands hard. Majungasaurus sometimes fed on Majungasaurus. Whether it was a hunting or scavenging, we can't say with certainty. But the implication is clear. This was a predator shaped by pressure, and in that kind of ecosystem, food is not always a clean story. The bones also record the physical cost of survival. Pathology show up across multiple individuals, including heel fractures in the feet, the kind of injury that tells you this animal lived long enough to recover, and long enough to keep moving afterwards. It's not just anatomy we're seeing here, it's a life lived at full speed in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. So when we talk about Majungasaurus today, we're not talking about a dinosaur discovered once and neatly filed away. We are talking about a century-long investigation, a predator that entered science wearing the wrong name, the wrong identity, even the wrong skull shape, and only revealed itself fully when enough fossils were gathered to make denial impossible. And that is why Charlie and his family matter to us, not just as a hatchling and habitat, but as a living continuation of a record that took more than a century to piece together. Every milestone we document, every behavior we track, every change in diet, enrichment, and containment, it all connects back to that fossil story, bone by bone, clue by clue. Next, we step out of the archive and into Charlie's world, the landscape, the climate, and the neighbors that shape Majungasaurus in the wild in the Paleoecology section. If you want to understand Majungasaurus, do not start with teeth, start with the island. Late Cretaceous Madagascar was not a continent packed with endless herds and predictable seasons. It was an isolated system with limits, a place where the margins matter, wet months and dry months reshaped everything, and predators survived by being efficient. All known Majungasaurus fossils come from the Majorano Formation in Mahajanga province in northwestern Madagascar. What makes those records so powerful is that Majungasaurus shows up repeatedly across multiple layers, not as a one-time visitor, but as a long-term resident of the ecosystem. The best material comes from the Animalbelma member, with additional teeth found in the underlying Masuruba member and the overlying Maidana member. Majungasaurus is baked into this formation again and again. Now picture the landscape, a coastal floodplain cut by sandy river channels with water routes that shifted like moving corridors. The climate was semi-arid and highly seasonal. Dry seasons tighten the food web, then wet seasons hit hard enough to rearrange the terrain. Geological evidence suggests early wet season debris flow sometimes searched through those channels and buried carcasses from the preceding dry months. It is brutal, but it is also why this place preserved fossils so well. And the isolation was real. Madagascar had separated from the Indian subcontinent less than 20 million years earlier, meaning the evolutionary rules were still changing. That separation shows up in the family tree. Majungasaurus appears most closely related to abelisaurs from India, not South America or continental Africa. A reminder that these predators are part of a much older map drawn by drifting land masses. In that world, Majungasaurus becomes the heavyweight. On land, it is the largest carnivore known from the formation, the animal that sets the tone across the floodplain. But even an apex predator does not know every zone. In the rivers and wetlands, large crocodilomorphs like Majungasaurus and Trematocamsa likely controlled the water margins, especially during droughts when animals were forced towards shrinking sources. Majungasaurus dominates the open ground, but the shoreline is negotiated space. So what was it hunting? The prey base here is surprisingly focused. The only known large herbivores are titanosaurs, including rapidosaurs. That has led scientists to suggest Majungasaurus, and possibly other abelisaurs, may have specialized in hunting sauropods. It sounds extreme until you look at the anatomy. This is not a long-legged sprinter built for chasing small prey across open terrain. This is a predator built for contact, stability, and force. Majungasaurus had short, stocky hind limbs, a body that reads more like power than speed, that likely lowered its center of gravity and improved footing, which matters if your strategy is to stay planted and hold your ground during the struggle. If your prey is a sauropod, you don't need to win a race, you just need to keep control when you get close. And we have direct evidence that Majungasaurus fed on rapidosaurs. Tooth marks attributed to Majungasaurus have been found on rapidosaurus bones. Whether those bites came from a kill or a carcass, the ecosystem message is the same. In a seasonal island system, opportunity matters. A predator that refuses a meal because it did not make the kill does not last very long. Majungasaurus was not alone out there either. The Majorano community included smaller theropods like the noasaurid Majungasaurus and the unusual dromaeosaurid Rachunabis, alongside reptiles and crocodilomorphs that crowded the river edges. It is not a stage with one predator and one prey animal. It is a network, layered, competitive, and shaped by drought pressure. Then there is a detail that shifts the tone of the entire ecosystem. Majungasaurus is one of the few dinosaurs with direct evidence of cannibalism. Majungasaurus bones preserve tooth marks that match Majungasaurus teeth, meaning these animals sometimes fed on their own species. It is not a monster story, it is a scarcity story. In a harsh season, at a contested carcass, dominance does not end at the kill. It extends to who gets to eat and who becomes the meal. Now bring that forward to the present. This is why Charlie's habitat is not designed like a simple carnivore paddock. A predator shaped by semi-arid floodplain evolves to value shade, cover, predictable water access, and controlled sightlines. It moves like an animal that expects scarcity and holds space like an animal that expects competition. So when our team builds for Charlie and the rest of the family, we are not just giving them square footage, we are rebuilding an island floodplain safely and intentionally. Heat management, terrain that rewards patient movement, viewing angles that create suspense for guests, and containment that respects what this animal becomes as it grows. Because Majungasaurus is not a predator built for a wide open world, it is a predator built for an island. And Charlie is that island story coming back to life. Next, we take everything this ecosystem tells us, the climate, the terrain, and the prey dynamics, and we translate it into the modern world as we reveal how Charlie's environment has been engineered and staged for guests in our exhibit creation section. Welcome to Jurassic World Kyoto, our newest park destination in the Jurassic World network and one of our most ambitious habitats built to date. We chose Japan for a reason. Island geography offers natural isolation, strong containment advantages, and an unmatched canvas. Bamboo corridors, volcanic rock, coastal air, and seasonal color that makes each habitat feel like a world of its own. This exhibit sits within Kyoto Zoological Corridor, positioned between the Irritator and Utah Raptor habitats, a deliberate placement designed to balance guest circulation with operational safety. But what makes this space truly different is who it was built for. This is not a carnivore showcase designed for one moment of spectacle. This habitat was designed to support Charlie and his family across every life stage, from a curious hatchling to a full-grown apex adult. This kind of build is never one department's vision. It's animal care, veterinary, horticulture, security engineering, and education, all building the same landscape together. From above, the enclosure reads like a self-contained watershed carved into stone, a continuous ring of engineered rockwork forms the perimeter, a naturalistic quarry wall aesthetic that doubles as hard containment. It doesn't look like a barrier, it looks like the land itself decided where the animal's world begins and ends. The habitat is organized into two major zones. At the front is a guest safety environment, desk planting, a broad lake, and stage viewing structures designed to pull attention toward the shoreline. The lake is the centerpiece, deep and dark, dotted with lily pads edged by natural shore transitions, and built to communicate one simple truth to animal and visitors alike: water is life. For guests, it becomes a photographic anchor of the entire habitat. For the animals, it becomes temperature control, hydration access, and a terrain feature that shapes where and when they move. At the back of the enclosure, the landscape rises into a cliff system. A raised pool feeds a waterfall that spills over the rock face into the main lake, creating the feeling of a living, circulating ecosystem. We can design a habitat perfectly on paper, but we only know it works when the animal tells us. The real test is what Charlie chooses. That choice is built into the exhibit on purpose. Vegetation is layered heavily around the lake edge, creating visual occlusion in shaded retreat pockets, while the right side opens to clear travel lanes and lighter ground cover. The result is a habitat with multiple microhabitats, with shoreline, right upland, sun pockets, deep shade, and resting zones that do not force constant visibility. There's a temperate forest lake exhibit by design. The animal is meant to be seen in short dramatic windows, not on demand. And at the core of the build is a principle borrowed directly from modern zoological design: choice. A well-designed exhibit gives an animal the freedom to room itself from stress, to move between sun and shade, hot and cool, high and low, wet and dry. That complexity, more than raw square footage, is what supports natural behavior and long-term stability. Our job isn't just to show you a dinosaur, it's to show you how it fits into an environment and what it needs to thrive inside. To support that, the exhibit includes a dedicated separation zone, a secluded area with minimal guest presence where individuals can retreat from the main habitat. It also functions as a discrete access point for veterinary teams and ranger units, allowing care, evaluation, and controlled movement without disrupting the guest experience or forcing unnecessary exposure on the animals. In a habitat built for a developing carnivore, behind-the-scenes flexibility is not optional. It is a foundation of safe management. First, introductions are always the moment of truth. Planning ends, observation begins. And that moment is rarely as simple as opening a gate. Our initial habitat introductions are deliberately staged, gradual, and repeatable. On the first release, the adult female stepped out, assessed the lake edge, then chose to retreat to the dens. She wasn't ready to call the hatchlings out. This is normal. Mother set the tone. Hatchlings take their cues from her: what's safe, what isn't, where to hold, and when to move. We did not rush that process. With animals like this, patience isn't a preference, it's part of the protocol. Once the family begins using a space, you start to see how intelligent these animals really are. They memorize routines, they learn timing, they recognize patterns, and they test them. On the ground level, the design team diversified the substrate across the enclosure, mixing straw, dirt, sand, and grass, giving the animals opportunities to dig, to nest, to scent work, and to build preferred resting sites. This is especially important for younger individuals like Charlie, where exploration and manipulation behaviors are part of a healthy development, and for adults, where secure resting zones and controlled territory behavior become essential. Working alongside our paleobotanical team, landscape teams populated the habitat with plant choices that evoke deep time. Cycads, ginkgos, and Temskia arranged to feel like a prehistoric floodplain edge. And while cherry blossoms aren't Jurassic flora, Kyoto is both a scientific showcase and a cultural destination, so you'll see them in the controlled guest corridor zones, a signature flourish that keeps the park's identity intact without compromising the habitat's functional core. The juveniles were already testing boundaries, investigating every log and edge, and finding the one corner we hoped they wouldn't. That's a good sign. It means the habitat is interesting, it means the animals are engaged, and it means Charlie's family aren't just being displayed here, they're actively shaping how the space functions. And for those planning your next visit, you can encounter these animals across our global destinations, from Isla Nublar in San Diego to Cascadia, Manchester, Creta, or Sanctuary. But if you want to see this program in its newest form, and catch a glimpse of Charlie's family, moving through a habitat designed to disappear and reappear like a real predator should, Kyoto is where the story is being written right now. Next, we move from habitat engineering to cultural impact, and trace how Majungasaurus has been portrayed, remembered, and reimagined through the lens of the Jurassic Park franchise. For most of the public, the Jurassic era of cloned animals is something you watch from a safe distance. A cautionary story, a series of documentaries, court hearings, leaked footage, and conspiracy threads that never quite went away. But for those of us inside the industry, Jurassic World was never just a theme park. It was proof that a line had been crossed, and once you cross that line, you don't get to go back to normal. Jurassic World fell. The world saw the evacuation, the incident, the failures, and the consequences. And after that, the animals did what animals have always done. They survived. Some were recovered, some were contained, some were never found. And as the years passed, the question stopped being whether dinosaurs existed. The question became whether humans were capable of living with them. That is the context for why facilities like this exist now. Not as spectacle first, but as management, containment, education, and when possible, rehabilitation. This is not Isla Nublar, this is what came after. And Majungasaurus sits right in the middle of that story, because unlike the headline animals the public remembers, Majungasaurus is one of those species that live for years in the shadow of the corporate record. A name that shows up in generic references, procurement logs, and internal research notes, more often than it shows up on a guest map. By 2014, Majungasaurus genetic material was already documented inside InGen's research holdings, and while the company never published a clean ingredient list, the implication is hard to ignore. Majungasaurus DNA appears to have been incorporated into the genetic framework of the Indominus rex. When you look at Indominus, the behavior profile, the opportunism, the volatility, the way it treated any living thing as either competition or food, that aligns uncomfortably well with what the fossil record tells us about Majungasaurus, including evidence of cannibalism. In hindsight, that hybrid wasn't just engineered, it was assembled from predators whose evolutionary stories were written in pressure and scarcity. And what we still don't know, what InGen never had to answer publicly in full, is whether a complete Majungasaurus was ever successfully cloned in-house on Isla Nublar before the fall, or whether Majungasaurus existed only as a genetic contribution, a line item in a project that became the world's most infamous asset. After Jurassic World collapsed, information splintered, official statements slowed, black market movement accelerated, and suddenly, dinosaurs were not just in parks, they were in the world. Sometimes before 2022, Majungasaurus began appearing in reports tied to unauthorized operations in the United States. Around the same period, there were alleged sightings in Senegal, suggesting either transport, release, or a distribution network far wider than the public understood. More recently, Majungasaurus was reportedly discovered living in the Biosyn Valley, and if you've been following the last decade of recovery efforts, you know what that implies. The line between exhibit animal and wild population is no longer theoretical. We are living in the era where dinosaurs can persist outside curated facilities, and that forces a new kind of response. That response is the modern Jurassic World Network, not a reboot of the old park, but a new generation of zoological institutions built for a world that has already changed. Smaller, smarter, more controlled, and built for long-term care, not short-term spectacle. And this is why Majungasaurus became familiar to the public in a very different way, through media. Because while real facilities tightened security and reduced public exposure, entertainment rushed to fill the gaps. The games, the simulation programs, the approved experiences, and the corporate rebranding packages, they shaped what people thought these animals were, even when most people had never seen one outside a screen. In Jurassic Park 3, Park Builder, Majungasaurus appears under its old synonym, Majungasaurus, echoing its real-world identity crisis. In Jurassic World the game, it becomes one of the earliest carnivores players can create, and later it's elevated into a headlining legendary release, Major the Majungasaurus, branded as a high-threat predator for a public that now expects danger as entertainment. In Jurassic World Alive, it's been present since the launch, reinterpreted with different horn placement and a stylized look, because even now, the public image of these animals gets rewritten depending on what sells best. In Jurassic World Evolution, it's treated as a premium draw, one of the deluxe edition exclusives, designed to look rugged and armored, exactly how a guest expects an abelisaur apex predator to look when the gates open. And then, as the industry shifted from fantasy back into reality, the simulations started catching up to the truth. Because the real challenge has never been, can we make dinosaurs? The challenge is, can we manage them? This is why Jurassic World Evolution 3, adding Majungasaurus with sexual dimorphism and babies, matters so much, because it reflects the real transition the parks had to make. Dinosaurs are not single specimens anymore. They are population, they are family units, they are growth stages, changing diets, changing risk, changing space requirements. That is why Charlie matters here. Charlie is not just a dinosaur in an enclosure. He's a proof of concept for what Jurassic World became after the fall, a zoological facility built to handle growth, behavior, and long-term welfare in a world where these animals exist whether we're ready or not. Majungasaurus has one of the strangest franchise trajectories of any theropod. It's not the headline star of the early era, yet its DNA may have helped shape the most infamous hybrid ever created. It's not the most common predator on public displays, yet it keeps resurfacing. In reports, in sightings, and in entertainment products that influence what people expect to see. And that is a real message of the post-fall era. Some animals become icons because the public sees them. Others become icons because of what they were used for. That concludes our Jurassic Park timeline profile on Majungasaurus, and why its legacy still matters in the post-fall world we're living in today. Thank you for watching, and I really appreciate you being here. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Majungasaurus and Charlie's story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Up next, we're heading to one of the most unexpected dinosaurs ever pulled from the ice, Paleoecology, the Antarctic crested lizard. And we're diving into the real science behind how a frozen predator with a bizarre pompadour-like crest became one of the biggest Jurassic surprises on the planet. Stay tuned.